Folks, welcome back to So Bad It's Good. We are here to talk about a book I burned through in a week. This is 656 pages. I needed 600 more. It is called Lorne, the Man Who Invented Saturday Night Live. The New York Times, get this, said, this is the kind of biographical monument usually consecrated to founding fathers and world historical scientific geniuses, but also it fits Lorne Michaels. Saturday Night Live is an institution and has created comedy legends, but this book reveals the man behind the scenes who, to me, is the biggest star of the whole show. Our guest today is the articles editor of The New Yorker and now the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Lorne, the Man Who Invented SNL, Susan Morrison.
Hi.
Susan, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
I mean, I truly geeked out over this whole book and I guess I was reading something that you said in the run up to the 50th anniversary, which there were so many specials, so many documentaries. You said that Lorne said something like he felt like he had lost control of his life.
Yes. Well, if you think about it, for the first 40, 50 years of the show, Lorne has studiously remained kind of behind the curtain.
Yeah.
You know, he rarely talks to the press. He has often said, if you're a producer, you're doing it right if you leave no fingerprints. He likes to be remote. And so as the 50th was coming up, there was the Jason Reitman movie about the first episode. And then there was my book. And suddenly he was this character. I think it was at least, you know, in my book, there isn't some little short actor playing him. It's just
no. It is one of those things. And if you've watched, you know, Saturday Night Live means something to everybody, I think, in America especially. And I remember my dad in the 80s saying, "This, you got to watch this." I watched the first episode, and it became this tradition. And I kept up with the tradition every week, even if I think like, the show's fallen off. Right. It's like a baseball team. You're like, next season, they'll get them, you know?
Yeah. No, Lorne often says that, you know, the thing about the show, you know, it's just there, like the weather, you know, but you have to be patient with it, like the Yankees or the Dow. It is good years and bad years. And the thing that has made it work is that it's this very durable formula. He often compares it to a Snickers bar. He says, you know, there's a certain amount of chocolate, a certain amount of peanuts, a certain amount of caramel. There's a comfort level. Viewers know what to expect. But within that formula, you know, you have all different kinds of things going on. So there's room to experiment. There's room to bring in new, younger people as the older ones exit. But the solidity of that formula kind of carries it through.
And you have this really great device in the book that you take us through a week at Saturday Night Live, and you have the Jonah Hill episode when it was the Five Timers Club. Mm-hmm. And then in between each day, you'll go back to the beginning of his life through to now. Right. Did you already know that? Did you always know that was going to be the entrance point?
I didn't, but it was a real light bulb moment when I came up with it. I had been interviewing Lorne in his office on Friday nights for a couple of years, and it was great material. But I started thinking about the actual nuts and bolts of writing a biography, and I realized, first of all, if a book begins in, you know, dreary 1944 Canada,
Lorne Lipowitz,
not that exciting. And I also knew that by the very end of the first chapter, I needed to clue the non-comedy elite into Lorne's mysterious power, into the grip he has on the psyches of all of the people in his world. And the average American doesn't know that. So I also knew that if I did a straight biography, you know, chronological telling of his life, you would start to feel like it was kind of a death march through the years, like 1988 turned into 1989, turned into 1990. And I think because of my experience as a magazine editor, you know, I like stories that have scenes where you're in the room and you hear people talk and you see what they're wearing and see what they're eating. I thought, okay, I can communicate the texture of the day-to-day of the show if I can describe a week of the show. And I knew it would also vary the texture of the storytelling. So once I had that, I was really excited because it you know, as you know, because you've read it, it gives the book this propulsive force. You kind of getting through to the end like the Hunger Games.
Yeah. No, I got sad when we got to Saturday. I was like, oh, let's go back to Thursday. No, it really is interesting. And for the, you know, lay person that doesn't know how this show is put together, you know, it starts on Monday. You go in, you have the writer just throwing a softball idea at the guest. And this, you know, book follows Jonah Hill.
Mhm.
And then there's the guest dinner, right?
Right. Yep.
The host
The
dinner.
host dinner. Yeah. Yeah. And that began in the early years pretty much as a way. This is a dinner where Lorne and the host, a few of his deputies, and a few cast members, they go and they eat a big Italian dinner on Tuesday night. And the idea is just to make the host less afraid, because what the host, especially if he's a first timer, is going through is almost like a military drill.
Yeah.
People compare it to jumping out of an airplane. And you want that person to know that he's going to be supported, that these people are funny and nice, they're going to have his back. Lord also says that it gives him a chance to sort of take the measure of the host, see what the person is like in a room, whether they always have to be the funny person, whether they can actually laugh at other people's jokes. All these little personality indicators are important in knowing, how this person's going to play with others.
Yeah, and how relaxed he is at this point.
Mhm.
This man has survived everything. He starts in 1976, but he started way before that,
Right.
obviously with, his own specials in Canada.
Mhm.
Then comes over, he produces for Lily Tomlin, he fights to get Richard Pryor on. Like there's this
Yeah.
really interesting thing, but you have this moment of him at the beach in his younger years, staring off into the ocean, wondering where his life is potentially
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, no, it was very interesting to me because I followed Lorne's career since he was on the world stage. But the part before SNL, when those seeds were being planted and he was, his vision of it were taking shape, was so interesting to me because almost everything he did, he had this weird Forrest Gump of a life where almost everything he
Zelig,
did,
yeah.
it sort of taught him, fed into what he would eventually do. And it was especially interesting to see how many low ebbs he had. Like 2 or 3 times in the years before SNL, he came very close to just throwing in the towel, giving up on television. At one point, he said, I should just go back to Canada and go to law school, which is what his mother always wanted him to do. So, he, it's not like he had a straight shot. He hit a lot of bumps. And when he went to LA, he had this idea that television was somehow behind the rest of the culture. It was the 60s and the movies were great. You had Scorsese and I mean, the 60s and 70s and Terrence Malick and Robert Altman. And you had rock music and really cool stuff going on in the music space. But television was kind of stuck in the 60s. And his idea was if you took the old-fashioned variety show format, but updated it with, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that would really be worth doing. And so that's what he was trying to do. And he kept getting knocked down. Nobody was interested in that.
Yeah. And then we have Studio 8H when he actually does the show. And at that point, you point out, like NBC on a Saturday night, that's a cultural wasteland in a lot of ways. They would air Johnny Carson reruns. And I thought that was so fascinating of the king of late night. He is making the most money for NBC out of anybody at NBC. And this was kind of like a kind of a game of chicken in a sense with NBC, right? With Johnny Carson and saying, you know what, we'll do a variety show to kind of piss Johnny Carson off or poke at him.
Well, Carson wanted his reruns off on Saturday night because he wanted to take a day off himself during the week. And he said, take that rerun off Saturday, put it on Monday so I don't have to work on a Monday. And I think he thought that they would just put on like a late movie or the affiliates would come up with something. But Herb Schlosser, the kind of visionary young president of NBC, said, no, we're just going to use that space to do something creative. And it was Herb Schlosser's idea that the show have rotating hosts because he thought of it, it was very kind of really visionary of him as a potential farm team, a place to develop talent for the primetime schedule.
Yeah.
So that
in fact, there was
smart.
inroads on that first season of potentially Chevy Chase could take over for Carson at one point.
Right. And I think that many NBC executives in the first 10, 15 years of the show, well, let's look at the first 5 years. They wanted to take Gilda Radner out of the show and give her a show, the Gilda Radner show. They wanted the Chevy Chase show. They wanted just to use Lorne's people as a farm team. And he resisted that because he viewed them as a family. But yeah, I mean, it was a really innovative approach to television.
Yeah. No, I'm. How do you then convince somebody at the point you start? Like, when did this idea first get conceived? And then what is the approach to convince a very private man who has a fiefdom, a kingdom, to be able to talk about his life?
Well, I knew Lorne a little bit
From
because,
the new show, is that
yeah,
right?
I worked on the news show, which was the primetime comedy hour that he did during his 5-year hiatus from SNL. And it was his one spectacular public failure. It was in prime time. It should have been good because it was stocked with amazing talent, but it just didn't. And so I know him a little bit. I met a lot of his comedy people, a lot of the writers back then, and I stayed in touch with them through, the next 4 decades of my career. So, and I would see Lorne maybe every 10 years and we'd say hi, but we weren't friends. So after the 40th, I was just so impressed by that show. And I found it so
Yeah.
moving the way all the different generations of talent, clearly loved each other and seemed like relatives, that I thought, okay, Lorne has been hiding in plain sight, for 40 years. This is a great story. And I sold a book to Random House about it without talking to Lorne first, without securing his access.
Wait, were you like, we got him. We got
No,
Lorne?
I didn't say that I had him. I said I thought it was likely that he would talk to me, but even if he didn't, I was connected enough to be able to write a good book about him because I had been hearing his writers and people tell him stories about him for years. I knew how gnomic and peculiar he was. So after I sold the book, I went to see him in his office and I said, Lorne, I just sold a book about you and the show to Random House.
No, I know.
No, but that's the thing. I said, I don't need anything from you, but if you want to talk to me, it'll be a richer and better book. And, your legacy deserves that kind of a book. And as any reader of the book knows, and you are one, he hates surprises.
Yeah.
And he likes to be in control. So he looked stricken at this news, completely stricken. We sat down in his office and we chatted for a little while. And one of the things I told him during that meeting that he didn't know that I think made a difference is I told him that when I was 16, I had come in from the suburbs of Connecticut and sat in the audience for one of the first season shows with
The Elliott Gould. Yeah.
And that he's a little superstitious, I think. And that show was one that meant a lot to him. He really felt like the show was coming together then. And the fact that I had been there at the beginning and seen that, I think moved him in some way. So we met a few days later and I expected to have to really do full court press and try to persuade him and everything. But we sat down and he just started telling stories about his life. And I thought, well, what? Wait, we just leapt over the negotiation part. And he didn't ask anything of me. He had no control, didn't ask to see anything. Nothing was off limits. But in that meeting, when we were having a drink, I didn't even bring a notepad because I didn't think we were going to start. So I kept running into the bathroom and write things down so I wouldn't forget them, And but anyway, he was on board.
In your career, is that moment really exciting when you realize, oh, he's spilling right now?
Yeah, it is really exciting when you're sitting there in the room with someone who you're trying to report on, and they're actually just being candid. I mean, I'm an editor. I've been an editor for 40 years, and so I haven't even done that much writing. I mean, that's what makes this whole thing that much more exciting. But something that I always tell all the writers that I work with is the key to getting good material is you have to get your subject like off their talking points.
Yeah.
People are so media trained today that they come in and they just go boom, 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 boom. But you really want to get them to be responding in real time. So I just felt like, oh my God, I'm having a real conversation with Lorne Michaels, and he's telling me interesting things about his childhood.
Because I'm sure,
jackpot.
Yeah, I mean, he probably like, okay, there's the by road of like after Chevy left on the first season, and then like there are certain like landmarks that we all kind of know, but then this book takes you so deep inside who this man is, and I thought that was really fascinating and at times heartwarming in this really interesting way that I wasn't expecting, where you start rooting for this man in 1974, 1970. Like I feel like a lot of us, or even people listening or watching, there's this period of like lost, you're lost and you're losing youth and you're losing time. And I thought, in the 70s, before, like you said, the TV explosion, you had it in movies, but not TV. And you're so close, you're meeting people like Paul Simon and Carrie Fisher, but you're not necessarily there yet.
Right. He had these roommates in Malibu, these cool guys, Joe Boyd, John Head and Gary Weiss. They were three Malibu beach bum cool guys who were working on a Jimi Hendrix documentary. And Lorne thought, oh my God, all I want to be is these guys. Like they're the coolest. They sort of taught him how to dress. They taught him how to, rub the rough edges off of his Canadian furrier son sort of persona. And then just all of a sudden, just like that, he was working with Lily Tomlin and like he was the cool one. But it is interesting that he didn't spring, ready, fully formed from Toronto down to LA.
Do you remember what the energy felt like when you were a kid at that 8th show with Elliot Gould? Do you remember the energy?
I do. I mean, I watched the show from the very beginning. In the 1970s, if you were a teenager, you would be in your basement with your friends and your bong, and that's what you were doing watching that show. But and it was so thrilling to be able to be there. The thing I mostly remember about it, I'm sure a fair number of the references in the sketches went over my head. I was just a naive public school.
But that's what it's supposed to do. Like, when I was a kid, they went over my head.
But what I remembered, and because you don't see this from home, is that you're sitting in the middle of a working television studio and there's a camera flying over your head on a crane. People are carrying in scenery. Someone's changing their dress over there. And it was that whole breaking the fourth wall, feeling like you were in the middle of this thing that was so exciting. That's what knocked me out. In later years, when I had my own children I had two daughters who were total theater girls, theater kids. And when they would come to the show, they would be like, oh my God, it's like putting on a show at school. Yeah. It is so theatrical.
Yeah. I got to go to one episode. I didn't even get a seat. It was, we had a friend that was a writer, and it was right the week before the 2016 election. And it was Tom Hanks, Lady Gaga. It was the David S. Pumpkins episode.
Oh my God. And I was there.
I didn't get a seat. And this was such a dream of mine to even be there. And I also was, I've worked with Melissa Villaseñor, who was on the show at the time. And I just remember thinking this is magical, but also that everybody was so exhausted. Because that was Trump, Hillary. Yeah. They had been writing. I remember seeing Alec Baldwin in his Trump outfit. He didn't seem like he was in a great mood. And I just thought, wow. And even the after party was like, do you want to go to the after party? But you could tell this writer was dead tired, really was just beat because they changed the opening sketch the night before, or the cold open. Yeah. And I just thought, wow, this is the dream and you're all exhausted.
Yeah, no, some people, some of the writers in particular, because I think they get the most tired. They're the ones who are, they're rewriting things in the fucking control room, while the show is on the air. But that somebody once said that going to the after party is almost just kind of like, it's like another meeting. It's like another part of the week. And to someone at home, that's so unbelievable because it seems like the most glamorous thing in the world. But for these people who have just been slogging since Monday, it's, it is tough. I remember at that show, though, watching the David S. Pumpkins thing. I was there for the read-through that week.
Did it work at read?
At read-through, it kind of worked, but there was no way of telling what a sensation it would be. Like, for me, when I saw the visuals of the guys, the dancing of the skeleton suits, and also Hanks's ridiculous, stupid suit, it was so funny. And it's always interesting when you're there to be able to, if you could tell, is this going to become a huge thing or not? I don't think I knew.
Yeah.
And then it did become this massive thing.
Well, I mean, there's been so many instances through SNL's history of you just don't know, and then the belief that he has in these people that hands off, he's giving basically, young adults, here's money, go shoot something, or here's this, go write something. And, I've been thinking about Lonely Island, God, he got them right at the beginning of a digital revolution. And I remember Dick in the Box, Lazy Sunday. We had not seen anything like that at that time, right at the precipice of the YouTube generation.
Yes. And one of the things that's really interesting about the show is how and I guess this goes back to his thinking about how television was lagging behind the other media. He's always ready to pounce when there's some new technology. In the early seasons, he had short films by Tom Schiller and Gary Weiss. But then, when then you have the digital shorts. He was ready with that, and it's somebody else in his age group might have kind of been scratching their head thinking, I don't know about this. And even when Lazy Sunday started going viral on YouTube, the NBC legal department actually sent a cease and desist letter. It said, this is our property, take this off. And Lorne had the presence of mind to say, no, this is good.
Yeah.
This is good for us.
This is what we want.
Let it go, and it's sort of, he's always been open to that kind of innovation. I feel like the Please Don't Destroy guys.
I think Jane Wickline, he really believes in her right now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because here's somebody, not in terms of digital shorts, but somebody whose humor, like it's people are almost caught up to it. And he believes in her, you can tell. And there's this really sweet moment in the book with Melissa Villaseñor, The Week You Were There, where it was, I forgot, it was like
Teen Murder Suspect
on the Weekend Update. Yeah. And he really didn't want it to cut it. He wanted to and it killed. Yeah. And she had her moment. And he loved that.
And I was sitting with him at the party, and I remember him just looking over at her beaming, and he said, she'll wake up tomorrow and feel different. She'll hear from people she hasn't heard from since high school. And so he's seen that moment, that breakout moment with so many people, and it gives him such a sense of pride. And, he's often counseling them to be patient. It'll happen. And so when you see it happen, it's beautiful. And you're right about Jane Wickline. He is really, there's something in her that reminds him of Gilda. She has a kind of a sweetness, a sort of purity of personality that doesn't have any of the showbiz trappings. You can't picture her in a push-up bra, doing one of those goofy characters. And I think I think you're right that the culture and even the writers might not have caught up with that yet, but he can sense it. And I just think that's so amazing that an 80-year-old man can look at this 27-year-old young woman and see that she is somehow connected to the next generation.
And also trust that, from 50 years of experience to be able to trust his own inner voice, because sometimes you'll see the comments on a Jane Wickline video they put up and some of it's really negative, but it's like, then you see week after week, people start catching up to it.
Right. It has its own flavor and its own tone.
Its own voice.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about the things he said to me about, what he was trying to do when he hired the first cast, the first group of writers, he wanted it to feel like a magazine in the way that, like when you pick up a copy of The New Yorker, the difference between, a Jane Mayer piece and a David Remnick piece, and because they have voices. And that all stems from, the depressing time he had in Hollywood before SNL, when he wrote on these shows and they'd write jokes and they would all just go into this sausage mill. And like when he was writing for Laugh-In, he said, they never even went to the studio. They were in a motel, probably right around the corner from where we are right now in Burbank. And he said that you never knew if any of your work was getting through, and you would watch the show on Monday in the motel and you'd see like glimmers of your jokes on the air.
Yeah.
And that sounds so depressing. He told me, I became a producer to protect my writing, which is being screwed over by producers.
Yeah, no, in terms, the show has always, handled politics, obviously, but also Lorne's very diplomatic about that as well. And, the week that you cover in this, Pete Davidson did an update bit right in the heat of the Ariana Grande breakup. Right. She's about to release a song that might be about him. He has to go on, do an update piece. And he talks about Dan Crenshaw in the book. He has an eye patch, and I think he says something that was read derogatory. And, Pete, not a big political guy.
Right.
And then he starts getting death threats, and they have to put security on Lorne and Pete. And, Lorne's then, counseling Pete about this, and then leading to the apology the next Saturday, which I thought was amazing, of reaching out to Dan Crenshaw, say, we would love to come on and potentially make some sort of amends. And he says, I would love to another time. I have a lot of dates. And Lorne says, cancel those dates. This is going to mean so much more than any of those things. And he was dead on right.
Yeah, no, I remember Lorne saying to him, listen to me, I'm a lot older than you. I mean, Lorne
not threatening, just
no, right, but just like as Lorne would say, look at the wide shot on it. Like, you want to get your message across. You could go do your Veterans Affairs dinners in Texas, or you could come on and millions of people could see you. And no, it wasn't at all threatening. It was really just sort of trying to turn the lights on to this guy and to say, you don't do this for 45 years without accruing some wisdom about how the world
Yeah.
works. And I think Crenshaw in the end was so grateful at
Yeah.
how it all played out. And it was this really unusual moment of television. And it was really funny the way the two of them interacted, but also deeply moving in that Crenshaw, who had lost an eye in an IED explosion, reached across and shook Pete's hand and talked about how Pete's father, a firefighter who had died in 9/11, was one of the real heroes. And it was just this, oh my God, you couldn't have scripted.
Yeah, there's humanity.
Yeah. And that's something that's important to Lorne. As he said about that show, he said, you always have to show that there's a decency to the show.
And I think sometimes that's the impressions, if that's what we want to call them. Didn't he say something about there needs to be a shred of dignity or decency in the impression?
Yes. Well, not decency so much as just like humanity.
Yeah.
Like he always tells his actors, if they're playing, a cretin like Donald Trump or whatever, that you can't play a character from hate.
Just
because if you're playing it from hate, there's not going to be any pleasure in the comedy. And if you give villains a speck of humanity, it makes them kind of relatable. I mean, think about Dr. Evil, and he always uses as an example Alan Rickman in Die Hard. He has a kind of an oily charm, or Bond villains.
Yeah.
They're not just hateful. He also says, idiots play, assholes don't.
That's amazing. Put it on a shirt. That's amazing. No, the week that you're there, though, there was just so many little details in the book that just made me laugh so much. And his constant reminder, like, do not let Jonah talk about mid-90s, because Jonah Hill had just directed his, I think, first feature mid-90s, and Lorne wasn't aware of it, or didn't really. It's an independent film.
It's a little
in a
indie
sense.
movie, the kind of thing that's not really his cup of tea.
And so he keeps saying, do not let him promote that at the cold or the opening. The monologue, don't let. And I thought those little moments were just like, so you're like there. And even the musical guest that week is Maggie Rogers.
Yes.
And you point out, I mean, like, this is a dude that, like, in the 70s, you're having like Paul Simon. I mean, there's so many insanely amazing musical moments, and that's continued today, but that's also because of the people he has around him now that suggested Maggie Rogers. And then I think his first song, she has her shoes off on the stage.
She comes out barefoot. I was sitting with him under the bleachers during this. It was one of my favorite moments of the week. And he looks at her. She's wearing a big red caftan and she doesn't have any shoes on. And he calls for the costume guy. He goes, Tom! And then he goes, where's she from? Kansas? A place with roads? I mean, but what's interesting, it wasn't just a kind of an attack on her. What I picked up spending so much time listening to all these notes is he's a showman, and it's all about showbiz of a very high order. And his critique of Maggie Rogers was that she didn't really know who she was as a performing persona yet. Like, she wasn't ready to play that room, in his view. He thinks about, we always talk about how, like in the old days, if a comic was playing a room in the Catskills or Radio City or whatever, you talk to other people who've played that room before and you get a sense, what's the vibe? Like, what do you need to do in that room? And I think he sensed that Maggie Rogers, even though she had a real following and is a really talented artist, to play that room, you have to get the studio audience who's in there and get them on your side. But you also have to be able to play to this camera to millions of other people. Yeah. It's a tricky thing. And so with Jonah and the mid-90s thing, most of the hosts, you're more like Bradley Cooper or something. Everyone's seen your movie. But this was this little indie movie about suicidal skateboarder kids, not so boffo. And Jonah kept wanting to plug it. And when Jonah wasn't in the room, Lorne would say, like, how many people have seen that movie? And somebody would say, maybe in the mid-90s. They were all kind of because again, it's show business.
Yeah.
It's show business.
But I love that aspect of the awareness of, because still, there was a part of me that's like, well, good art wins, like maybe it's like the best film ever and we want to promote, but it's, it's like still poking at it a little bit. And we are now an institution that we sell advertising at top dollar.
Right.
We're not going off the air anytime soon, even though there's been decade after decade where there's articles of Saturday Night Live is dead and it still survives.
Right. One of the things, so many people who have gone through there have all these theories and observations about Lorne's longevity. Conan O'Brien likes to say that, in the Game of Thrones of show business, Lorne will be the last guy standing. And, long after nuclear annihilation, Lorne will be in his office feeding the fish, and it'll just be him and the cockroaches. And he'll look at one and go, I see it was a Chevy cockroach. And then there's another thing I quote in the book is because if you think about not just the executives that he's outlived, but the owners of NBC. NBC has changed hands, and it was particularly tough during some of the years when General Electric owned the network, and these people, the GE executives, were not so attuned to SNL. And Mike Schur, the former SNL writer who's now a showrunner of a lot of other shows, I quote him from a podcast saying, thinking about what the GE executives were thinking and saying, like, they'd say, well, how come our laser-guided missile department is doing so much better than our fart joke division? Imagine you're a comedian and your boss is basically the people that make microwave ovens.
Well, that's why, a lot of people might not know this, is that Jack Donaghy from 30 Rock, Alec Baldwin, is based on Lorne in a sense, and you can really, looking through that prism, you can really see it, and
totally.
Tina Fey created that show and also one of Lorne's favorites.
Yeah.
And, I just find also the people emulating Lorne in terms of just in a small, like the impressions.
Yeah.
It starts with Dana Carvey, even though in my mind it always started with Mike Myers with Dr. Evil.
Right.
It actually started with Carvey, even though everybody had their version of Lorne.
Yes. I think Dana was the first person to really refine it and perfect it. And he told me that these were the years when he was playing George Bush, and that was an elaborate makeup and wig job. So he said he'd be sitting in the makeup room with a bald cap on, waiting for the wig and entertaining everyone doing his Lorne impersonation. And he also did the thing with a pinky, putting the pinky to his mouth because Lorne was biting his nails at that time. And
because it was this right after he quit smoking, he was eating popcorn. Yeah, okay.
And so when he went to see Austin Powers the first time, Dana told me he was completely shocked when Dr. Evil walked on and started talking, because he realized that he felt that Mike Myers had lifted his Lorne impersonation right out of the makeup chair. Dr. Evil is bald, and had no idea that he had been studying him. So, it's like this meta impression of an impression. And I think there was actually some hard feelings between them for a little while.
Yeah, they worked on Wayne's World 1 and 2, and 2 had its, issues. And that's why it was so nice at the 40th anniversary to see them come together and do the Wayne's World sketch.
Yeah.
And why do you think or suppose those moments are so important for us? Like, you talked about the 40th, and there was it was like this weird heartwarming, or even in terms of the 50th, the live show was really great and so many amazing moments. But for me, I got misty-eyed at the musical performance on Friday night. I was watching it, and we were watching
Chevy in the front row.
And Jimmy acknowledging Chevy and being so out of breath at the Blues Brothers thing. And it just, the pairing was so, and the highlighting Devo or Fred Armisen on drums during the B-52s. Like, are you kidding
me? And Fred
me?
drummed with Devo too.
I know. That's why I was like, that to me was something I planned on tuning in for maybe one song, watched all 3 hours, and have since gone back and watched it again.
I think it goes back to just how remarkable it is that this one guy from Canada has been so influential on what has made 50 years worth of, Americans laugh and what we find funny. And the way he's done it is that he's sort of built this culture. It's like a big tribe. It's like a culture with walls around it, like this cultural sandbox that these different generations of people can all play in. And it's like they're all related somehow. And Fred Armisen told me that when he meets an SNL alum, he feels like he can hear something in their voice.
Yeah.
That like they're all somehow connected. And when you see them together, there is this kinship and pride. And, it's no accident that all these different generations of SNL people have been guests on 30 Rock, and they're all in Portlandia, they're all on Fallon, and they're
Or even last on Emma Laney, Armisen was there.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a family. It's like The Godfather, you're in there, you kiss the ring, and you're going to be taken care of.
What is the ring that Lorne Michaels wears on his finger?
That was a great story. He has, for a guy who wears, Gucci loafers and, nice Italian suits and everything, he has this big funky ring on his finger. It's a big ring with a big red Sufi stone in it that he bought in the 70s in Santa Monica. And he bought it from this guy. It was like a junk shop, and it had this inscription on it. And the guy in the store said it means "with the luck of Ishmael." And when Lorne was first telling me about this, he said, I realized, Ishmael had no luck at all. It was kind of a, had Schlemiel and Moby Dick. And so he said, so I realized this is like a Sufi joke. And I remember him telling me, you could open with this ring in Persia. So I think he just loved the idea, that kind of you can find jokes, you can find humor all over the place. And again, it's this weird, funky thing from the 70s, but not only does he still wear it every day, he's had replicas of it made for every member of his family.
I love that. That was the detail in the book where I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because there is like this, for his, there are so many issues throughout the week of the Jonah Hill. Like, Leslie Jones is upset at the beginning of the week. Cecily Strong is playing a political figure that she does not want to make fun of in any way. It's 1,000 problems that he has to stay calm, cool, collected, and sometimes show no emotion. And so when you get those like emotional moments or just that ring detail, you're like, oh, so sentimental.
Yes, no, exactly. And he's Chris Rock told me this guy has been hundreds, if not thousands, of people's bosses. So by now, he's such a student of human character. He's a very quick study. He can really take somebody in, size somebody up very quickly. And as a manager, he seems to have a real sense of like what each of them needs. And he deals with each of them kind of differently. Hader told me that Lorne would come to him like in the dressing room when Hader was hosting and just say, just shut the fuck up. You're going to be fine. Just go out there and do it.
Because he had real bad nerves, right?
He was really anxiety attack prone. And, but Molly Shannon, said, oh, he would just come over. He would reassure me with his eyes. And I saw Kevin Nealon last night and Nealon told me that the first time he was going on, he was terrified. And Lorne came over, put his hand on his arm, and he said, are you sure this is what you want? It was just so funny that it calmed him down. So he knows what levers to push with different people.
He leaves the show in 1981, right? After the first 5 seasons?
After the first 5 seasons.
And, it was a hit. He did what he needed to do. And he thought, I'm going to go produce maybe Gilda Radner's Broadway show. And I'm going to try other things. And he spends 5 years doing some of these things, eventually going to the new show. And Jim Downey, who he's worked with his entire career. Who I think you were his assistant, right?
Yeah, I was Jim's assistant, yeah.
I mean, that guy's a genius. And so, but it's not the cachet that SNL has.
Right.
SNL was in the boonies except for that last season, which was not a stunt casting season, but you had Billy Crystal, Eddie Murphy, all of these really heavy hitters, right?
Yeah, and that was Dick Ebersol producing it then. And that really went against the grain of what Lorne's original notion had been, which is you want to cast nobodies. You don't want people who television audiences know. You want them to be able to invent themselves on SNL. And that's why you can have those kind of Melissa Villaseñor moments. But that cast, they called it the Steinbrenner cast.
Yeah.
Because everyone had, they knew Billy Crystal and Chris Guest and Marty Short. But so when Lorne came back in 85, he didn't want any of those guys. He wanted to start fresh and he wanted to go back to his original idea. He stumbled though. I think he must have had some nervousness about coming back and maybe even nervousness about his own age at that point, because he as he put it, he went too young. He hired a bunch of guys, people who had been in in John Hughes movies.
Yeah, we had Robert Downey
Yeah.
Jr. and Anthony Michael
Hall, and then some really talented sketch players like Joan Cusack, but they didn't know how to be a comedy ensemble, and actors have a different, film actors have a different energy. Like people who have an improv background, they're tuned into each other as performers, and I mean, I remember Al Franken telling me, with that cast of kids who barely were shaving, you couldn't even do a sketch about a Senate hearing because you couldn't cast Anthony Michael Hall.
Well, and then Anthony Michael Hall says, I don't want to play teenagers. And it's like, what are you going to play, man?
Yeah. So that was, again, it's interesting to see that Lorne had these moments that were real bumps. They almost canceled the show after that year.
Yeah.
And Lorne's agent, Bernie Brillstein, said to NBC, come on, you lured him back. You have to give him another chance. And then he went out. And again, he learned from his mistakes, and he picked one of the best casts. It was Dana Carvey, Kevin Nealon, Phil Hartman, Jan Hooks. It had all started coming together again.
And the great thing was, Bernie Brillstein had to call and fight for that with
Brandon
Tartikoff, and they feel like they owe it to him for another season, and it does gel. And the lead up to that, there's only 1 or 2 stars, Dennis Miller on Update and John Lovitz
and Nora Dunn. Also.
And they have a sketch where he saves John Lovitz from a fire. Lorne Michaels himself at the very end it's so dark in retrospect because he's like, meet me in the limo downstairs. And the next season, it takes off. You have these great memories from Dana Carvey in the book of come out to the Hamptons. Dana Carvey's answering the door and it's Paul McCartney.
Yeah. So Dana gets hired over that summer, right as Lorne is kind of restocking the show. He's living over a garage somewhere, eating off a hot plate. Like he's nobody. Lorne hires him. He comes to New York. He doesn't know anything about New York and doesn't have any place to live. So Lorne's just gotten divorced. So he says to Dana, come out and stay with me in the Hamptons. Dana, it's on a little prop plane that he thinks it's going to go down and like Buddy Holly. But he ends up living with Lorne out in the Hamptons for a month.
Yeah, was he in Jack Nicholson's room or something?
Exactly. And it just sounds like such a funny odd couple kind of month where, Dana would pick the tomatoes in the garden and help set the table. And then Paul McCartney would come over. Lorne has always enjoyed this the kind of funny social engineering experiment of putting his green young performers in a room with his mega famous friends. Paul McCartney comes to the door, Mick Jagger comes over, Paul Simon is there, and these guys are trying to keep their cool.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of blows me away because you put yourself in the shoes of Dana Carvey. Here's a Beatle. Here's a Beatle. And it's just it's just Lorne's friend.
Yeah.
It's just Lorne's friend.
And Dana was so, he said he would go back in Jack's room, was calling all his friends, like, Paul McCartney's coming over. Paul McCartney's coming over. But he was self-possessed enough. He told me he was so proud of himself that Paul came in and sat down and he didn't ask him a Beatles question. Instead, he complimented on one of his solo albums or Wings. And think how great it must be if you're Paul McCartney to have somebody not ask you a Beatles question.
I know. Yeah. It was so great. All of these stories, just such an amazing collection where I think we were talking before we started where I said, I need another 600 pages. It's like paring down because how many interviews did you end up doing in total for this?
Oh, hundreds. I mean.
Over how many years?
10. Well, the reporting probably 6 or 7, and then I wrote for 4 or 5 years. So, but yeah, between 1 and 200 interviews.
What was the best part? The chasing the interview, or doing the interview, or piecing everything together?
Well, I'd say the interviewing was so fun because, first of all, Lorne himself is a great talker, and that was a real pleasure because most people haven't heard him talk, because he doesn't talk to the press much. But then when I started talking to all of his people, all of these writers and performers, they were a dream because all the people that Lorne hires are smart. They're intelligent people. They're very articulate and they're funny. So there wasn't a dud of an interview among them.
Yeah.
When you're a journalist talking to people, sometimes you're talking to someone and they just don't say anything that you even want to write down. They're just kind of boring. But every one of these people, the transcripts that I had were just so rich. That's why my original draft of the book was almost twice as long.
I need that book. I'm telling you. No, I would imagine too, and especially when it comes to the performers, did you ever find out that people were performing for you at a certain point because they just can't help it? It's in their bones?
Well, that's very interesting. And it's something Lorne and I talked about even at the very beginning, because he was conscious of the fact that there were 2 books about SNL that already existed, an oral history done by Tom Shales and Jim Miller, and a book by 2 very interesting New York Post reporters, Hill and Weingrad, that came out about the first 5 years. And Lorne says that he didn't read either of those books, but he kind of looked at them a little bit, and he knew that they were full of things that were exaggerated or downright wrong. And we talked about this because we both knew, I know enough comedians to know that when a comedian is telling a story, they're going to embellish it a little bit to make it funnier.
Yeah.
That's a human instinct anyway. But if you're someone who's a comic, you're really going to do it. So I started to try to train my ears to kind of figure out when I could tell that somebody was polishing a little bit too much. And anyway, so he was aware that people would maybe exaggerate, so I was just super, super careful in I fact checked everything. And when there were conflicting accounts, I would sometimes go to him to be like a tiebreaker and say, which do you think is true? And more often than not, he would say, I don't remember. It was the 70s.
Wait, was there any ones that stand out in terms of conflicting accounts? Because, by the way, my own memory, I realize, as I get older, is starting to go. Like, there's certain, I was like, I thought I saw this band open for this band, and it turns out I was wrong. So I can see sometimes where there are conflicting accounts, but did anything stand out to you?
The one thing that I got a couple of different versions about is an incident that happened in the first 5 years, maybe the second or third season, that was called Black Friday, where there was a kind of a revolt among the writers who felt that I think Dan Aykroyd had found a piece of paper. One telling of it has that showing that, the writers weren't getting paid as much as they should have. And there was a big confrontation with Lorne. And he was very disappointed because he doesn't like big emotional displays. He doesn't like confrontation. And he took it he reacted like a disappointed dad, And there were a couple different versions of that. That one was really hard to parse, so I included both versions. Aykroyd remembered it as something that had more to do with making changes too late, which made it really difficult on the guys that had to rewrite the cue cards. I suspect that it was something in the middle, that there were just a lot of things about the way the show was done so quickly.
Yeah.
And everyone was overworked, and it was sort of a, hey, can we slow down and try to make this more humane? But a lot of times, toward the end, sometimes Lorne would ask me, say, well, I don't remember. Can you tell me, he realized that I knew his life better than he did.
Yeah. So, what if he just calls you for the rest of his life and is like, do you remember what I said?
That's fine with me.
I know we have about 15 more minutes here. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Rosie Schuster, who was his girlfriend and wife at the very beginning, kind of before SNL.
Yeah.
She comes to SNL with him, and I think then she dates Dan Aykroyd, maybe.
Yes.
But can you explain to the people the importance of Rosie Schuster to Lorne?
Yes. Well, when Lorne was a kid in Canada, first of all, his father died suddenly when he was 14, and this was a real cataclysm for him, as it would be, I suppose, for any kid. But his mother was really depressed. There were financial issues. His whole life crumbled. And there were a few figures in Toronto who kind of took him under their wing. One was his uncle Pep, who was a successful businessman. But the other one was Frank Schuster, who was half of the Canadian comedy duo Wayne and Schuster, who none of us have really heard of, but they were on the Ed Sullivan Show more than any single act, more than Topo Gigio. And so I'm dating myself there. But,
yeah, guys, look that up. You'll see what you...
But Rosie Schuster, who was 2 years younger than Lorne, was Frank Schuster's daughter. And Lorne met her. They became friends. I describe it in the book as almost like one of those Tudor engagements. Like they were both prepubescent, but it was sort of almost like a foregone conclusion that they would grow up and become a romance. I mean, he was practically lived at their house, after the years when his father died, because there was a nice comfy den with a real father in it, and a
Yeah.
father who loved Lorne and sat and explained comedy to Lorne, told him about Preston Sturges, dissected the jokes in Marx Brothers films, and Lorne just ate it up. He was a sponge. And so he was kind of part of that family. And then when his relationship with Rosie became romantic, this comedy was kind of in the bloodline. And they got married very young, and feminism sort of came calling in Canada right at the beginning of their marriage. And I think Rosie then started wondering, wait a minute, what have I done? I've married a guy just like my father, and she wanted a little bit more independence. So they had a bumpy on again, off again marriage. But when he started SNL, it was just always kind of assumed that she would be part of it because she had been part of the comedy journey. And it was, I think, unusual. They were technically married, but each of them saw other people, and I think she had a lot to contribute.
Yeah.
She was really smart. She had the comedy rhythms in her blood. It was interesting to talk to her with all these years under her belt. She has a lot of distance and perspective on it now. She looks back at herself at that time and feels that there was just she can't believe that her natural instinct was to downplay her contribution and to even not take credit. She worked on some comedy shows where she would use a pseudonym because she just didn't want to call attention to herself. And anyway, it's interesting because now I think she's really ready to own it and to own her contribution.
Which she should. I mean, because
Yes.
if one move, I was just thinking about how many moves it took to create Lorne in a way.
Yeah.
And if he didn't have the Schusters, and if he didn't have this all led to him on a beach wondering, that's what I just think is so inspirational in a way. What also is interesting is that he's happily married now. He has 3 kids, right?
3 grown kids who he's very close to.
And I was watching the Steve Martin documentary on Apple TV, which I really recommend. And I think he has Steve's child is born.
Yeah.
And he has a call with Lorne. And, Steve's trying to express that he finally feels this love that Lorne had spoken about in regards to being a parent. And I thought that was so amazing of Steve Martin and these figureheads in all of our lives, like Steve Martin or Lorne Michaels, them learning to be human with each other or teaching each other to be human.
Well, Lorne, the pain of losing Lorne's father was so great that I remember he said to me once that, and if you're a kid and something bad happens like that, a parent dies, you sort of have this, I think he carried around this feeling of guilt. He had argued with his father before his father had this collapse, this coronary collapse. So his whole life he felt kind of guilty about it. And he told me that it wasn't until his own children were born that he understood that flood of unconditional love. And he said that he realized, oh, I'm sure my father really loved me. I mean, it really makes you want to cry.
Yeah.
And he's always telling his charges, the people who work for him, don't put it off. Have children. It's the best thing in life. And I remember the Jonah Hill week when I was there, him sitting with Jonah, and they were talking about this show business, the unquenchable need among people in show business to, if your movie makes $50 million, you want it to make $55 million.
He tells Jonah it's never enough.
It's never enough. But he does say to Jonah, this business will eat you up so much that you want to find another thing. And if you're lucky, it's a child. If you're lucky, it's a child that puts everything in perspective and makes you realize what your priorities should be and what really is important. So he's an incredible proselytizer for having children.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was one of the many special moments in the book. Finally, about 5 or 7 years ago, I think the article started coming out of who is going to succeed Lorne Michaels.
Mm-hmm.
And, Tina Fey's name was bandied about a lot. And, I think after the 50th anniversary, I was more of like, well, like me, just nobody. Well, let's keep him. No, I was like, I don't want Lorne to go. Like I think I was like, he's got so many people around him. Can't we just have him
Right.
come in on Fridays and
Right,
Saturdays?
right.
And, but there is this discussion. And,
Yeah.
I was like, well, they don't have to stay up all night on Tuesday
Right.
and right. Maybe we can space it.
Yeah.
But there is something so romantic, and it's an institution, and we don't have so many more of those these days.
Right.
That I don't want this to ever go. What do you speculate in Lorne's career?
No, I agree. I don't either. But to go back to what you said about, well, my theory is, and I think everyone who watches the show has that impulse because we do feel that we own it. It's this collective cultural property, and our vote should count, damn it, right? But I was thinking about that around the 50th a lot too, and it's very hard for me to picture someone just going and wholesale replacing him, whether it's Tina, whether it's Seth. And because his taste, his personality is so deeply intertwined with every aspect of the show. And if the strangeness of the fact that he's never missed a single show, there was never a Saturday night where he had the stomach flu. He's always been there. He lives for it. I mean, it's hard to imagine him without the show, hard to imagine the show without him. So I've been touting this idea that you just mentioned something similar, that he has such a great team of deputies. Aaron Doyle, Steve Higgins, Eric Kenward, Carolyn Maroney. They're really able, and each of them represents kind of a strand of his taste and personality. I could easily imagine a situation where even into his 90s, he comes in Wednesday for read through, where you hear 4 hours worth of sketches and then you pick the best ones. And Saturday for dress rehearsal, where again, he kind of does his amazing jujitsu on those sketches. And, he could just be home reading murder mysteries the rest of the week, and the younger people could be doing the day-to-day. That's what I would like to see.
Did you ever ask him about that?
I did ask him, and, he would be sort of evasive some of the time, but mostly it was just, no, I don't have any plans to leave. I mean, he doesn't want to go sit on the beach.
Yeah. No, I mean, like he did earlier in his life. Yeah. He's already done that. Yeah. But the thing that I keep thinking about too is this, when he's at a crossroads, some of the interesting things that meant something to him, like Three Amigos. Like he's out there in the wilderness in a sense, and Three Amigos, obviously, if you guys don't know, Martin Short, Chevy Chase, and Steve Martin, he writes that movie and it reinvigorates him. Three Amigos of all movies.
Well, what that was about, it's interesting because he was always trying to, find this kind of like sweet spot of what his show business dream was. And in the beginning of SNL, when, he called it was like an Eden, when everybody was still getting along and, collaborating, and it was like an egalitarian thing. That was really fun. And then there was infighting and jealousy. But with Three Amigos, he said it was sort of the way he imagined George S. Kaufman doing it with the Marx Brothers, like staying up late, rewriting the third act, drinking too much coffee. But just this idea of a true collaboration with people who you think are really funny, who you respect, and just being all in it together. That was his dream.
And it kind of brought him back to that first year of SNL in a sense.
And something he says a lot, and it's one of his gnomic things. It's kind of half a gag, but it's also something I think he believes. He'll say, how many funny people there are in the world? There are about 9. And I think what that means is like he wants, that's his little tribe. He wants to be around like his funny people, and he finds it sustaining and nourishing. And that's what Three Amigos was for him. And at the best, at its best, that's what SNL feels like for him.
Yeah. This book is just really, if you can't tell by this last hour, it means so much to me. And this hour has meant so much to me. And it's filled with so many details. Like, she takes you through, even with the Jonah Hill, the picking of the sketches. And there's a fight to get a Weezer sketch on, which actually ends up going on with Matt Damon later. But the fight of like, who, oh, are you a Weezer purist? Or are you and they're giving it to Leslie Jones. That doesn't make it. And then there's like, in the midst of the show, they have to cut something. And it's either like the dog sketch.
Motorcycles or the pugs, or it's a real nail biter. I mean, some people have told me that they're reading that Saturday chapter and their heart is pounding.
Yeah, it was really, because I was like, no, don't. And I know it's already happened, but I'm sitting there wondering what's going to happen. And, I just wanted to live in this book because it is so true to what actually is out there. You kind of really nailed it and captured it. What is the best part, or is it being now out here on the stage yourself? What is that like for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I have been an editor for 40 years, which basically means I've been helping other people refine their work. I always say editors we never do this. We never talk into a microphone. We never wear the hotel bathrobe, So it has been really fun. I have to say, I love, talking to all these people about Lorne was really fun. And now that the book is out, talking to other people about Lorne and seeing how, it's very moving to me how deeply SNL is in the culture. It's not just a Monday morning water cooler thing. Sometimes I feel like it's almost rewired people's brains,
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, completely. And you'll watch it, and I'll watch it like a sporting event. I'm like, come on. Oh, or you're like, I'd love to see this in dress. Like where, it really, you become part of the process in some weird way, and you root for it.
Right.
And you look forward to new discoveries that you're going to then watch for the rest of your life in film and television, and they're going to do unique, amazing things. But it's really good to have this moment to remember.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is. I definitely feel like it's just in the water. It's what Fred Armisen was saying about hearing it in people's voices. I mean, you realize people write these catchphrases into their wedding vows.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just part of the world that we live in, and it connects people.
Yeah, my girlfriend dressed up as a Coneheads for one Halloween. And then two last things. What does Lorne drink? Is it the wine? Is it the white wine? Is it
No, well, when I was reporting this, he was drinking Belvedere vodka with a little side chaser of cranberry juice that he would put in the drink.
Elegantly put in the drink?
Yeah, would elegantly kind of dose it. And but the last couple times I saw him, he was drinking non-alcoholic beer. I don't know if this is past his 80th birthday or
he smoked because he quit smoking at a certain point. He's like, he does take care of his health.
Yeah, he's a very healthy guy. He walks like a maniac. And, he probably does want to do this for 10 years. Maybe he just figured I should give up the vodka. I don't know. I haven't asked him.
Yeah. And then I was watching the 50th, and at the very end on the good nights, everybody's on stage.
Yeah.
And I was really, because I had started your book already, and I was just honed in on him, and I was trying to imagine, what is he thinking in this moment, because his face seemed like a mask in a sense.
Yeah.
Did you watch that, and did you speculate on what he was thinking?
I watched it, and I watched it in a hotel room with a bunch of the SNL writers, because the whole studio was clogged with the hosts and the cast, all celebs. But it was really fun watching with the writers. I watched it, and I felt like, again, I don't know. I've just observed him a lot, but I felt like he was, it was like a mask, but I could tell that it was a moment full of intense emotion for him. Also relief at just having the damn thing over. I had seen him Friday night after the concert, and I thought he looked really tired, because these were 2-3 hour performances that they were doing, the music on Friday and the show on Sunday, and they were doing them with no dress. So there's no dress rehearsal. So they just did it.
Oh.
And that, I think, was stressful.
I was tired watching both of those from my bed. Honestly. And I was watching Steve and all of these people at dinners afterwards. I'm like, what are you guys doing? It's exhausting.
Yeah. So I could tell that the momentousness of it, I could see it there in him, he was sort of looking down a little bit, but he was proud and happy. And
yeah, no, you end the book with the after party, and Pete Davidson comes up to him, and they have kind of a father-son moment before he takes home a girl. And did he have any moment with you on the 50th, or any moment that you're the most proud of? That's a weird question.
I don't know. Not really between me and him, except that now, we just talk on the phone every now and then, and it's just very nice.
You're a New York Times bestseller.
And the fact that the little dance that we were doing while I was reporting it is behind us, and now we are just two people who know each other well and can talk to each other. That's a lovely privilege.
Yeah. You guys, the book, Lorne, the Man Who Invented Saturday Night Live. This is Susan Morrison. If you cannot tell, I so absolutely love this. Go order this. Now, I want you to go to a bookstore and actually get this. Support bookstores. If you can't do that, I guess there's online things that you can buy this on as well. But Susan, thank you so much. I will always remember this.
Thank you. Really fun.